Hello, everybody. I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings. And so last week I did Sorcery and Cecelia, and this week I'm doing the Grand Tour. By the way, I want to note offhand, if you look carefully at the cover of this edition, it reads "By the authors of the Grand Tour" above the main title. If you look at Sorcery and Cecelia, which I find very odd because that's like saying by the authors of the sequel to this novel. Anyways, so the Grand Tour. This is, as I said, the sequel to Sorcery and Cecelia. And this follows up immediately thereafter to continue the epistolary nature of the first book. What happens in this one is that it is told through the commonplace book of the Lady Schofield, which is, I suppose you could consider it her diary. And the other half of this is told by Cecy from the deposition of Mrs. James Tarleton to the joint representatives of the British Ministry of Magic, the War Office, and the Foreign Office. So because Kate and Thomas, who were married at the start of this book, were engaged at the end of the last one, and Cecy and James, who were engaged at the end of the last novel and married at the beginning of this one, they had a double wedding, went on a grand tour together, a wedding journey, what we would call a honeymoon in modern parlance. If anybody wants to bring up the concept of the honeymoon being derived from various things, including Viking traditions of being drunk on honeymead for however long after the actual wedding took place, yes, I'm aware of it, but clearly if they were calling it a wedding journey and not a honeymoon, honeymoon becomes an oddly modern parlance as opposed to a historical artifact. In any event, so this particular story is another mystery, this time much more of a proper mystery, because in this case we are not dealing with two of the major players in it actively concealing from their allies what's going on. So they get married and they start off for France, cross the channel, which makes Cecy violently ill because starting magicians have trouble crossing water, which, if you have read any fantasy or know anything of folklore, you know that magic traditionally has trouble crossing water, so I'm not really surprised that Wrede and Stevermer threw that in. So they head across, and when they're staying overnight at their inn in Calais, they first get approached by a woman who is known only as the Woman in Blue, who hands them a small bottle which is full of some sort of scented oil. And then somebody breaks into Thomas's mother's room because Thomas's mother has been living in Paris for years now and is thus traveling back with them. The Dowager Marchioness of Schofield, as she is now, Kate indeed expresses some great startlement about being asked about the rooms. And you, my Lady Schofield? She had forgotten that marrying the Marquis of Schofield made her the Marchioness of Schofield. So it was, by the way, if my pronunciation is off and anyone notices or cares, feel free to let me know in the comments. As I've said before, I don't do research, and I'm too lazy to look up whether that's the proper pronunciation of any of these words. I'm as much victim as anyone else to the "I've read the word a million times but never heard anyone say it" syndrome. We've all had that happen with paradigm. In any event, so after this attempted theft and looking at this oil, they discover that they go to visit an archbishop in Paris who is a personal friend of Lady Schofield's, or rather the Dowager Marchioness of Schofield, Lady Sylvia. They go to visit him and he tells them that it's chrism used as part of the traditions of crowning a new king of France. Well, France, following the revolution, ceased to be a monarchy, effectively. And So it was almost not really worth it, except that, of course, the concern was, because this is immediately after the Napoleonic Wars, the concern is that somebody would use that to effectively make Napoleon or his son or someone else into the emperor of all Europe, or into an emperor of France, or some variation thereof. And as they travel, they discover more and more things, strange rituals being done at Chartres, and when they get in contact with the Duke of Wellington, and James was his aide de camp during the war, and Thomas worked with him closely during the war, and they get in contact with him, and he explains to them that there have been a series of thefts of various royal regalia. And so they start looking into these, because this is a universe where magic is real, and thus, if somebody put together the right things, they might be able to magically create someone who is, by right, the King of France, or the Emperor of Europe, or something like that. And so it's a genuine concern, and they start following this trail. Um, and as they go along, they pick up bits and pieces of the mystery. And one of the most enjoyable things in this book, for me at least, is looking at Kate and Cecy as they logic through problems, much to the fascination of their husbands. Um, because one of them will say, and of course we must consider young Mr. Daventer. Yes, Cecy, do tell me about Mr. Daventer. And she will then cheerfully explain what is entirely obvious. Uh, so this book is following them as they travel, and Kate going into raptures at being at the opera, and all of them enjoying being newly married, but at the same time, there's the undercurrent of danger, there's the constant investigation, um, and I enjoy it very much because while this isn't a mystery where you can necessarily figure things out because all the hints are given, maybe they are. I'm not very good at reading mysteries to figure out in advance who has done what or why. Um, you get you get to watch this mystery unfold, get to watch them investigate, um, and to see Cece's development and practice at becoming a magician. And this this book also continues to be very, very funny. I very much enjoy the back and forths between Thomas and Kate. I never actually bothered to, you know, put to bookmark anything. So as I speak, I'm desperately flipping through the book to find my favorite bits. But I very much enjoy I very much enjoy the humor of this book, and as I said, it's very adventure. There's a lot of adventure in it. James gets shot because Thomas is foolish enough to fling himself around being a romantic. Um, they have to cross the Alps in the middle of winter, which, as anyone who knows anything about mountains will attest, crossing mountains in winter is something of an event. And so that is that is definitely that is definitely something. Sorry if I sound distracted. really, I've just been trying to find the conversation early on where Kate bemoans the fact that she is going to have to engage a maid, which she finds extremely concerning, because Kate has problems which are clear throughout the first book but continue in this one. She has problems with clumsiness, and she's very, very anxious in social situations lest she drop things or spill things. And so she's very concerned about hiring a maid, one, because a good lady's maid at that period in history is a very important thing, and you want somebody with the right personality, with the right talents, with the right skills. This isn't just like hiring somebody to clean the grates. A lady's maid is somebody who does your hair, helps you dress and undress, helps you choose your clothing for a given event, helps you prepare properly for social events, and since dressing for social events is an incredibly important thing for a young woman of that period, the last thing you want is a lady's maid who will fall down on the job, who won't be able to do the things you need her to do. And these are upper floor staff. These are people who there were ranks within staff at that time. You know, the butler was in the upper echelons of staff, and so were ladies' maids. And Kate is very concerned that her lady's maid will sneer down her nose at her for being such a unfortunate and incapable lady. And Thomas, in this scene, which I have given up on finding, tells her that she needs to, smarten up and don't worry about it. I declare you are not allowed to hire a maid who will disapprove of you. And Kate says, Thomas so seldom puts in the effort to be stern. It cheered me, she says. Yes, Thomas, I said. Very good, Kate, and so you won't let any of this, you won't let this worry you anymore. No, Thomas. He looks at her with suspicion. Yes, Thomas? No, Thomas? Is that you, Kate? Of course, Thomas. You're not the woman I married, he shouts. Whatever you say, Thomas, she says, having said no one could resist such temptation, and as he flies out the door, telling her, You stop that at once! Which, because I am, of course, quoting from memory and not, in fact, reading out of the book, that probably didn't give you the proper full effect, but I very much enjoyed that back and forth, especially because Kate considered it to be her doom coming upon her that she would have to hire a maid. She was exceedingly lucky that two of her mother-in-law's associates, that one of them had a younger sister who was looking for such a position, and Kate basically took her on at once because, well, after interviewing her for barely a minute, she decided this woman was competent enough and she wasn't going to have to look any further, so yes, success. Cecy, however, looking to engage a lady's maid, went through a very long and complicated process, and then, when a woman, Madame Walker, shows up, Madame Walker is French, but she married an Englishman who was killed at Waterloo, and Walker is desperate. She has a young daughter, but she has no references, no means of getting a job, and she's very worried that her daughter is going to starve on the streets, that she'll starve on the streets, and she keeps on saying, I am a respectable person, me. And she is. And Cecy looks her over, sees that she can do her own hair up in the latest style, has fixed up her dress to be in the latest style, and decides this woman needs the job, clearly can handle the job of being lady's maid, and in a snap decision, Cecy hires her, which turns out to be extremely useful in the course of their investigations. Both in this book and in the third book in the series, 10 years later, which I will talk all about next week as I finish up this trilogy. So I hope somebody's enjoyed this, and as I said, I'll see you all next week.